Okay, we have the money. What do we want to do? This is literally going to be the brain of your company. Everything that you do, all the data, everything is going to go inside this thing. They just think it's a one and done, like I bought Salesforce, I'm good to go. And it's like, no, like we constantly have to build new things as your business changes, right? We're literally saving you guys tons of money every year if we were to add up how much automation we're putting into place and what that is doing for your cost savings. The strategies change, the tactics change, our branding's going to change, who we go after is going to change.
Welcome to Salesforce Radio, your destination for insights, news, and community connections within the dynamic Salesforce ecosystem. Jordan, as we know, is one of the top voices in the Salesforce influencer space and was recently voted top voice on LinkedIn. So congratulations on that. It's a great way to start 2024. And is that a first for you?
That is a first, yeah. So they've been giving out different kind of badges on there now. I got one a little before the end of the year that was specifically for consulting, which was cool by itself. And then this next one, the top voice, is something they actually go through and hand pick it. And I think they told us on the call I joined, it was like 0.5% of LinkedIn gets the top voice badge. So it's like very highly selected who they choose. So yeah, kind of the joke now is like 4 years of my life posting every single day. I finally got the badge, right? So guess it made it worth it. But yeah, it's cool to be a part of it. They give you free LinkedIn Premium. You get some different benefits, early access to some of the features that come out. And then just like overall, I think a supportive group of just everybody else of being kind of attached to them in the top voice group too, which is cool.
So is it a top voice of a certain category, or it's just kind of top voice there?
It's top voice. Yeah, it's top voice for all of LinkedIn. So the best way to describe it is nowadays it's different because on Instagram and Twitter, you can buy the blue check mark. But on LinkedIn, you still can't do that. So it's top voice is kind of the equivalent back in the day of like earning that blue check mark, like kind of getting verified and like you're a notable person on the platform creating content. So kind of cool that way.
That's exciting. Do you know anyone else in the space who's gotten that type of honor from LinkedIn?
Not in the Salesforce space because it's so highly selected. So other peers that I've had just in different industries, definitely that I've seen, but not in the Salesforce space. So I think I'm the first there.
Wow. Well, congratulations. That's really cool. Hopefully you'll get some recognition from, the top dog somewhere or another at Salesforce. It'd be great
right?
It'd be great to see that come out of it as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, let's get into your journey a little bit. I know I've been following your posts now for a couple of years and following the story that you've kind of laid out for so many of us on LinkedIn and in some other places as well. And you didn't come from a traditional background. I don't know. Did you have any desire to get involved in tech when you were younger? Was that something that you thought about at some point?
Yeah, it was pretty untraditional the way I went about it. All honesty, I didn't know what Salesforce was as far as tech, maybe, but I didn't actually have any like family or friends doing much of that. So my parents come from like a city out here in Utah, Price, Utah. It's really blue collar back in the day. So like their parents grew up working at like power plants. My grandpa was a coal miner. So very blue collar kind of city. So my parents kind of branched out a little bit from there, got into some sales stuff, worked at some companies. So for me, it was never like, anything that I kind of grew up around. So I was in college and started going to college, at least at the University of Houston, and ended up dropping out and starting my own business right from the jump. I was actually going to school over there for the entrepreneurship program. So I thought, best choice I could make at that age, being 20 with no life experience, was to start a business with really no skills. But I had seen this product online of like how you could wrap vehicles. So I was like, hey, I could probably do this. And then where I was living at the time in Houston, like it's a pretty good area for a lot of like car related things, a lot of car shows out in that area. And then nice weather out in Houston all year long. So you had that. So I started doing that a little bit, did it out of my parents' garage, marketed myself literally just like on Instagram. It did really well, and then moved to Salt Lake, kept the business. When I moved here though, I'd finally moved out of my parents' place. So at this point I'm like 21 or so, and got a full-time job. So I started working at a company called Jet.com that was later acquired by Walmart e-commerce. And that was my first thing in tech. So I started doing some tech stuff, started off in their call center, and then moved into more of a business analyst kind of role. So I was kind of helping the business figure out, how can we get people on the phones less time? How do we figure out where we're like kind of slacking off that we can improve? And at that time, I met a guy named Ryan, and he was our Salesforce admin for the company, but he was based out in New Jersey. But he was cool enough to, like, when he would come into town or when we had calls, to talk us through Salesforce, what it was all about. The main thing for me at that point, I'd just gotten married. I was 24 around this time. And I was like, all right, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've kind of been doing this business on the side. I had some employees, but it really wasn't going the route I wanted. I didn't really have the skills to do it. So he told me about this like track you could go down basically with Salesforce. And I was like, perfect. Like, I need to figure out how to make money. I need to figure out how to get into a career now that I'm married, figure that kind of stuff out. So I shut down the shop and then went all in on the Salesforce stuff, started learning on Trailhead, and then started applying like crazy to jobs. And somebody here in Utah was awesome enough to give me that shot. First company I worked for was Podium, and it was a SaaS company. So that was like my real first, like, I'm in tech now, SaaS company. And it had an awesome team. So we already had an architect. We had, I think it was like 2 or 3 developers, had a senior admin. So I had a really good group to, like, first job to go into, to like really have some guardrails and to learn from and to have all that guidance that I needed. And it really just kind of took off from there. So from there, I loved it and just kind of kept moving forward with all the other jobs down the resume that you see probably now. So yeah, a little bit untraditional how I got into it, how I landed into it, but it's been a great path so far.
Definitely a fun story. And I personally got introduced to the Salesforce ecosystem during the pandemic, and I had heard of Salesforce. I had seen Salesforce. I talked about Salesforce as something that people used in the industry, but never understood what was behind it, that there was this huge, engine of people all over the world who were Salesforce professionals. And what I was taken by when I got involved in the Salesforce ecosystem during the pandemic was just like every day you were hearing a story about, service people and people from the food and the service industry, people who all of a sudden were jumping into this, kind of Salesforce ecosystem and were finding success or, finding difficulties, because obviously it's a huge transition. There is a lot you could do, but, that really, it took me by surprise. One thing that I love about what you're saying is it's so cool to me that, a lot of times people think about, hey, I'm going to go get a job in tech. I'm going to go get a job in some industry. It means I got to move somewhere. I got to, and basically what you're saying is the first company you started working for was not even so far from where you grew up. And at least I personally don't, I know there's a bunch of big companies out in Utah, but that's not the place I would think you're going to find a job in Salesforce.
For sure. It was definitely that way. So that was cool how it worked out, where it was like literally down the street. And and then I was so new to it too. So very similar to you. I had no idea that this is like that the Salesforce ecosystem was so big and that so many companies used it either. I thought it was going to be more like, it's this one-off thing and maybe I'll get lucky and someone around here uses it. But started finding out like, no, a ton of Fortune 500 companies use this thing. Like, it's a massive tool. So yeah, when I got introduced there, it was a whole different like way of looking at life. I felt like it really changed the lens of how I could look at like my career moving forward, of like opportunities now available learning this skill, which was cool.
Another really cool thing you mentioned is that, first company you worked for, the SaaS company, they had a bunch of people already working in Salesforce, right? So they were already deeply invested in it. And I find, and I speak to customers of Salesforce all over the world, and I'm talking about from small nonprofits to massive multinational companies. And there's such a difference between, a small business that has the CEO managing Salesforce along with everything else, or a small business that takes on, a junior admin or even someone who knows a little bit more, or a partner, and a medium-sized to, large startup where they've got a team that's already involved in Salesforce, that's done things, has made, that's documented what they've done and actually has some sort of roadmap for where they want to go. So what was that like coming into that and looking back on that first experience you had, seeing that like, okay, they had some resources, they had investment. Like, what do you have to say about that?
Well, it was one of those moments where I remember I was so early on, I'm like 24 at this point, real kind of first big kid job, I would say. So I'm like barely starting out. There's a lot I don't know. And as I moved on to these other startups, it wasn't that case. Like maybe we'd have one, right?
Right.
But it was very fresh. It was very new. It was very like, figure it out. We don't have the resources. So I got that told to me quite a bit at that first job when I was looking to move, because I didn't stay too long. And people were like, grass isn't always greener, kind of giving you that cliche. I was like, oh, well, I had such a good start and worked with awesome people, and the business itself was awesome, treated like all the employees so great, that I was like, oh yeah, like they're all going to be like this because I'm staying here in Utah and this is pre-pandemic. So it's like, I'm not working remote. Like they're all probably going to be similar. And so as I moved on, I quickly realized that kind of the hard way of like, oh, dang, like this is way more difficult to try to figure this stuff out when you're alone and you don't have, someone like an architect with 10 plus years of experience that you can go and talk to and all certified up of like, how would we actually build this? Like, what's the best way to scale it? So it puts you in different positions. Still grateful that I took them and I was able to learn from them. But yeah, looking back, I would say as like a company, that's what I've tried to flip the script on too. So as I would interview for these new jobs when I was still working full time, or even now as a consultant, I try to always leave that piece of advice. Like, hey, if you're asking me, like, this is literally going to be the brain of your company. Like everything that you do, all the data, everything is going to go inside this thing. And what oftentimes happens, at least in startup world, is kind of looked at as an afterthought, in my opinion, where it's like, the product itself, especially in a SaaS, like engineering, huge resources over there, like going to do everything because they need to have a great product, right? Sales, because we got to sell it. Marketing, because we got to figure out how people are going to click on our ads. And so then Salesforce becomes this like tiny little resource where they're just like, I don't know, hire someone. And I felt like the hard part too was that it felt outdated in the sense that people didn't know the titles. They didn't know the roles. They didn't really know what we did. They didn't know what you should get paid. And so it made it very difficult when I worked for a few companies like that to hire the talent and push in the right direction, because they weren't looking at it as, no, we're literally saving you guys tons of money every year if we were to add up how much automation we're putting into place and what that is doing for your cost savings. Instead, it was kind of like a sunken cost. It's almost like comparison to hiring like someone for IT. Like, okay, I know I got to have it because it's got to be secure, but like, I don't really want to spend money on that. So I guess let's just get the minimal amount of people in here to do it, So yeah, I mean, it was a big difference between the two. And like looking back, it was just I think just an awesome opportunity that I got right off the bat to be able to be surrounded by people so I could see a good look from the jump working at that company.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying. And I see such a difference when I get on the phone with, someone who's, interested in potentially doing something with Titan, whether it's, forms or documents or CLM, something like that. And I can tell when I start talking to them, depending on the role, whether they feel like Salesforce is a burden in their organization or whether it's actually something that is the backbone of the organization, the single source of truth, the thing that's making the organization, have the data it needs to understand what the heck's going on. And I can tell right away who feels, which way. And I have friends who have worked in companies and, have been C-level executives. And, I'll start talking to them about Salesforce because that's what I like to talk about when it comes down to, the tech world or, anything like that or CRM. And I have friends I've talked to them and they say, yeah, we have Salesforce, but nobody uses it. We don't even know what we're doing with it. No one's ever implemented it. They've been, and they feel like they have to have it because maybe some investors said, oh, you need Salesforce. And it's such a missed opportunity, but it requires that investment. So I guess now your journey continues. You've now worked in a couple different, companies that were pretty large. Yeah. And, what's the biggest Salesforce work that you've managed?
Well, I worked for a public company that's been public since like 2002, I think it is. Their name's Health Equity. And it was really kind of a blend between tech and healthcare stuff. Their big bread and butter at the time was setting up like HSAs for insurance stuff for people. So it was a massive company. They'd been around forever. And then right about the time I was getting hired into them, they were kind of like on an acquiring streak as well. So they had acquired a few more big companies that got, put into their business. So as far as like our team went, it was definitely past 20 plus, could have even been a little bit more than that. When we were first working there because of one of the acquisitions, they were on Oracle, we were on Salesforce. It was determined to keep Salesforce. So we ended up even hiring, I think through Zenify, another set of like consultants. So we had like another architect, we had a bunch more developers, a bunch more admins to help us with that lift. And that was literally a 2-year project, just getting everything migrated over. So all in all, with all the people I worked with, definitely 20 plus and a lot of moving pieces and a massive company that had a lot of things we had to be aware of too, with like audits. Obviously you're dealing with like healthcare stuff. So then you have like all this like personal information that can't go out. So I learned a lot going through that specific company. And it was so different because at that point, I'd worked for 2 different startups. So all I knew in the Salesforce space in this new career is like, you move fast, you make decisions quick. If you break stuff in production, no big deal, because there's like 100 of us there and whatever. Like we'll send out an email if all came to worst to the clients, or obviously it wasn't like advised to do that, but if it did, not the end of the world. And then moving into this world where it's like the complete opposite, it was like, no, like everything you do, you go and you ask somebody else. There's a process for literally everything we do, that we have Q&A. Everything that you push out is going to go through all these checks and balances, because if we fail an audit, it's a huge fine for us, right? So it puts us in a bad position. So, and even more, there's like, fines, there's certificates that they have for like health organizations that you can get revoked. And so it's a big deal that you do it the correct way. So it was interesting. I'm jumping a little ahead, but I moved back into a startup after that job. And it was a difficult transition for me because I'd gotten so adjusted to this new way of thinking of like, it's slow. We move slow. You ask a bunch of questions, like you get assigned one thing because it's very scoped out, right? Like we've already went through everything of like, this is going to probably take Jordan a week to do. So like it's on his plate and that's it. And we also had the money and the resources to have multiple people with all these different roles. So moving back into a startup was difficult because I was still trying to apply that mentality. And then it's like, well, it's not really the way we work, right? Like you're moving way too slow. We need you to make decisions quicker. We need you to be able to figure this out sooner. You don't need to ask me all these questions. Like just decide for yourself what you think is best. So it was a hard transition going back, but it's a very big difference between the two sides of it, a startup versus somebody that's very well established with a lot more to risk. So both were really great to learn from, I think, in the Salesforce space too.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, just in interfacing with the customers or with prospects from my end, who are either like, a bank, it could take a year to get through a conversation with a bank. And then they might come back a year later and be like, okay, we want to pick up on that conversation as if it was yesterday. And I'm like, right. We spent 6 months a year ago. I haven't heard from you. And like, it's still sitting on the top of their desk, this project. And it's hard sometimes to relate to that coming from, the SaaS world myself.
Yeah.
But, there is something to that. And I appreciate what you said about, the difference being that everything's already planned out. So when you get to, hey, this is what you're doing, that's what you're doing. You know how much time there is. Not that things can't go wrong when that's going on. Things can still go wrong. Things can get delayed, but at least you have that clear trajectory and you know what you're doing. But then again, when you're in that fast-paced environment, you're making decisions quickly. It's 2 very different ways to work. But I guess what would be interesting for me to understand is like in the big organizations, like is there one place where you found that Salesforce provides like the most value? Like is it to sales? Is it the automations for, the doctors? There's different people. There's so many different places in healthcare, especially. You've got many different people in the system. Where do you think the value is for these organizations?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't have like a full overall like skill set and everything. I feel like for at least my journey so far, I've always been kind of placed towards the automation. So my bias is there. I felt like for whatever reason, even at Health Equity, being such a big company, you kind of had like a niche. So it's like you had your team, but then like you had your role on that team. So it was like, for example, like Leanne's going to look over like marketing cloud stuff. Jordan's going to look over like anything flow automation related, maybe some integration work. Justin's going to look over like all our development and architecture. So you'd have all these different people playing a different role, and that's just kind of what you do. And then as those tickets come in, that's what you're left with. So a lot of my experience has been around the automation. So I've tried to make that my niche now in my consulting business. So, my bias is there. I think the biggest like unlock though in my brain to actually see how that worked was actually trying to do the math to figure out how much money the company is saving. So for an example, if I go in and I implement a flow, what I was really bad at a full-time job is I get a ticket, I just do the ticket. I don't really look down the pipeline to see how that affects the business. It's just like, cool, I automated this thing, whatever, move on to the next ticket. Well, now as a consultant, like I have to look at it different because I got to pitch people and I got to sell and I got to like tell them why it's worth the value. So the biggest unlock for me has been like, okay, let's take the time to actually ask a few questions before I do this, which is like, okay, tell me this process now. Like I'm doing a project right now, for an example. We're going to just pull in some more information on the case object for this client. And he showed me the process before, and it probably took him about 15 minutes to go click around in all these different places to go find all the information. So it's like, okay, on average, your customer representatives are spending 15 minutes to go find all this information just to figure out if we can update this case. So if we automate this and put it all in one spot and we drop that down to 20 seconds, we're essentially saving you guys 15 minutes, 14 minutes, let's just call it that. Okay, what's 14 minutes times whatever that person is getting paid per hour, whatever it is, right? If it's $30 an hour, cool, take that math. What do they get charged every week? What do they get charged every month? What do they get charged every year? And that brings you down this math path to actually add up these savings. And I think once I started doing that, that's when for me, it really like unlocked this whole thing of like, man, this automation in Salesforce really is a game changer, because you see those hacks sometimes online, right? Where it's like increase your mouse speed because you'll be able to click things, and you're like, what's that going to do? Like a few more seconds. But when you add it up in the long run of what you're actually paying somebody, it adds up quick. And you mentioned it earlier, even at startups, right? You have someone that's, it's not a customer service person. It's the CEO, it's a VP of sales, it's VP of marketing. And it's like, they probably got a pretty good salary. I'm going to guess is not $30 an hour, right? It's probably a lot higher than that. And that's the person that's spending 5-10 hours every week doing this process. So it's like, dang, we automate that one thing that could save you guys easily 50 grand right there. So it's trying to make that connection for people. And as I've done that for myself, I feel like that has really been like the best bang for the buck with Salesforce, because that's what I've been around, but it adds up quick. So I would say automation on my end.
That's really cool. So it's actually cool for you to have gone from being the person who's inside the automation, who's creating it from the technical perspective, which when that happens, oftentimes you get lost in it. You get lost in the details. You're not thinking about who the user is, who this is actually affecting. And now you're taking it as the business person, and you're trying to sell these services to people. So that's a really cool transition. It's really it's nice to hear from people who aren't consultants because they wanted to be consultants, but because they actually did something, they gained a skill in it, and now all of a sudden they're out there consulting others in how to improve what they're doing in their organization. So I guess with that, like now you're taking on your own clients.
Yeah.
What's your ideal client look like?
So for me, again, it's definitely on the automation side is what I'm trying to shoot with. Being in the Salesforce industry this is going to be my 7th year coming up. I definitely have like an overall, jack of all trades kind of thing where it's like I can maintain a lot of stuff. I try to push on that because I feel like those are the fun ones for me to work on. I've had like the most experience with it, but I can do a little bit of everything. But the ideal client that I'd be looking for is I've gone back to like the tech space. So I'm usually looking for somebody that is making at least 20 million in ARR. It helps sometimes if they've had, a Series B funding, at least they have some cash on hand so that they can actually start looking at these different tools. Like I explained earlier, not that it would be my case or preference, but in most cases that I worked with, they're looking at Salesforce like an enhancement. So once they've raised some money and they have some cash on hand, it seems like that's usually like the moving piece for them to be like, okay, we probably need to make this Salesforce stuff a little bit better. So it's usually someone around there. And then, tech space for sure. And then ideally, if I really narrowed it down, it's somebody that also has some kind of like operational role in place. I've done it without, but it makes it a lot easier if there's somebody like a IT operations guy or a marketing operations guy or a sales operations guy, because that person that they hired tends to really have a good skill set. They have a good skill set of understanding the vision of the business over here, but then just enough technical side so that they can understand a lot of what I'm doing. So it makes that bridge a little easier to where I'm not having to to totally simplify everything I do into like, fifth grade language so that I can explain to somebody that's never worked with Salesforce. Those people tend to know, and a lot of times have some like computer background degree. So it's like, okay, they can understand what I'm saying. I don't have to be so simple. And then they also have a good like advocate on your side to be like, no, this is going to take, Jordan, like a little bit of time. Like this isn't just flipping a switch. Like he's got to do X, Y, Z to get this done. So it helps when that person's there, I feel like, so that I can just really get in, work with that person and work on those two aspects, the vision of the business, where we're headed, and then strategy with them of like, okay, what do we want to build? So that's usually the ideal person for me.
So you're saying, so that's the ideal person, meaning that maybe under them, they don't have their own admins. They don't have their own Salesforce devs necessarily.
Yeah. And it's been sometimes both. Most of the time, I would say they don't usually have a team yet. They're usually, okay, we just bought this thing. They've probably been the one running it, in all honesty. And now it's like, okay, we have the money. What do we want to do? Do we want to hire someone in-house, or do we want to hire a consultant? I think the advantage with the consultant is obviously depends on price points and what they want to do ultimately. But in my case, a lot of the time it's like, well, you could go hire somebody, let's say for $70K. They're going to have 1, 2, 3 years experience. Or you could hire someone with 7 years experience that's been around, that specifically builds, Salesforce orgs for tech companies. And maybe it's going to cost you $100K a year because I'm only going to work with them. I'm not going to work full time. So it's going to be some kind of, division there on what we decide. So it's like, okay, $30K more, we have the cash on hand. And this is specifically what he does. So I think the advantage there for them is to do that. And then you have somebody that comes in and can set up the foundation. Now, my goal is obviously not to be there forever. So it's really trying to help them get educated on that piece too, where it's like, hey, I'm just coming into as like a short-term vision here, like maybe a year, 2 years, where we set up this foundation so that you can go hire someone that is cheaper to start maintaining this. But in my cases, when I worked full time too, and it was like, I was that guy that they would hire with a couple of years experience. And then it's like, okay, take care of all the architecture and all the integration and how everything works. And, you don't really know how to do that at that point in time. You're still trying to learn, flows and like all this kind of 101 stuff. So it's, I think in my opinion, a little too much for someone at that space. I don't know how they don't expect you to kind of build out like a little bit of a spider web for their company, because you just don't really have that expertise at that point. So I think that's the advantage there. And that's what I try to pitch is like, hey, it's short term. We don't want you to go down this cobweb side. We want to strategize. This is specifically what I do. It's a little extra, but like it's going to really set you guys up so that you can hire someone and get the right person too, right? Like we can help you educate them on who to find, what the right fit is, who the best person is to take over after we leave. All that stuff they don't know when they're looking for either or. So I think it makes it nice. They can do that. And then on top of that, right, like we'll have like Google reviews and things like that. So it's also a cool way where you're not going to be looking at so much a resume. You're looking at a proven track record, where it's like almost like buying a product on Amazon, where it's just like, okay, cool. This consultant over here has X amount of Google reviews. This is specifically what he does. Like, obviously he's good at this. He's done well. So it makes it a little easier for them to hire as well. I would say they don't have to worry so much about picking the wrong person if they go about it that way.
Right. I like that model. It does sound, like it's a little different from what I hear from maybe some other independent consultants and things like that. Cause it seems like you're kind of trying to position yourself in between, like an independent consultant who's like, you can pick up the phone and call them, but at the same time, you're actually trying to bring this kind of multi-year plan with the transitional kind of period or bringing in someone in the company to kind of replace you. And I think that's a really cool way to do it, which is basically coming in, showing them how you can bring value into the org, and then showing them, hey, this is something that's not a one-time investment, right? This is a continuous investment you got to put into this, this brain that you have, this living organism, which is Salesforce. And I'll be here for a year and a half, on and off doing these projects, but like it doesn't end there, right? And I think that for business owners, that I think it's a lot of times the hard thing. I'll be on the phone with someone and they're like, it's Salesforce, they don't have this and they don't have that, or you always need to pay for something more. It's like, yeah, but is your business growing? Like, if your business is growing, then Salesforce is going to have to grow too, because that's where so much of the business should live if you're making that investment.
Yeah. And real quick on that too, that's such a good point, because again, I think a lot of what I end up doing and have done in my career is like trying to educate as you learn this yourself as a Salesforce like internal user. You have this like responsibility in a way, I feel like, when you go to these new companies, to try to educate on these things so that the word gets out there. Because that same note, like that is like a easy thing for the business to accept in marketing, for example. We always know marketing is going to change. It's like the strategies change, the tactics change, our branding is going to change, who we go after is going to change. So they already are accepting, like with marketing, when they hire marketing consultants that I've worked with on different projects, that guy is like solidified because they're like, well, we're always going to need, this person here to help us with these changes. Same goes with your product. Same goes with like the image you're putting out there with your branding. Same goes with sales. So these different departments, they already accept that as my business grows, this has to grow and change too. So again, kind of going back to this afterthought idea, they just think it's a one and done. Like I bought Salesforce, I'm good to go. And it's like, no, like we constantly have to build new things as your business changes, right? Like marketing changes and you want to collect different things. We have to adapt to that, like in Salesforce. The example I try to always use with them is like, and this is the way I truly feel after talking to a bunch of people as a consultant. I feel like what happens is they don't know much about it. They go to the Salesforce guy, the AE, they buy this thing. And instead of the Salesforce AE showing them that he's literally going to hand over a bucket of Legos, he shows them all the cool models that he built with the Lego. So he built the Star Wars thing. He built, all these like different models of Legos. And that's what he's showing. And they're like, awesome, I want it. And then he like disassembles it, puts it in a bucket, and then is like, here you go. And so they get sold that. And then when they unwrap it, they come home, they dump it all out and they realize it's just a bunch of Legos and it's not the cool models that were shown. They're like, well, how do we put that together? I have no idea. And so that's kind of where they're sitting, is like this, like on an edge of kind of like disappointment, frustration. Oh, I didn't have the resources for it. I didn't know I needed these kind of people to take care of it for me to get to that. So yeah, you're in this space where you're trying to educate them on that. Like, yeah, for us to continue to build these different Lego models for you, well, you're constantly going to need someone to do that for you because we know how to put all these things together. You don't. So that's what I try to use too going into it as well, on like pitches, so that they can get a better visual for how it would look. Right.
I love that approach. And a lot of the things you're saying, it's just making me think of different conversations I have with like so many different organizations that use Salesforce. And I'm just thinking about like the difference between when I get on the call and they're like, I say, and so tell me a little bit about how you're using Salesforce in your organization. And when someone just says to me, we're a Salesforce shop, we do everything in Salesforce, it like warms my heart. I'm like, oh, that's so good. Like there's something so healthy about it.
Yeah.
Not that it didn't come with hardship, not that they didn't have that stage where they got home with the Lego box.
Yeah.
They're like, what the hell? But like, that's like, it's not that that didn't happen, but I love when I talk to these people and they're just like, we do everything Salesforce. We want to put everything at Salesforce. Everything should be at Salesforce because it's got that, when you have that holistic kind of model of a Salesforce org and every single part of the business is running through it, you can see so much. You could see so much. And I saw, I've seen this kind of post on LinkedIn a bunch of times, and I just reshared it like last week. Someone posted, I sold my company for an extra $1 million because we had Salesforce. And it was saying all this stuff about, and I've seen multiple people say this kind of stuff, oh, it was a big investment to have Salesforce. We didn't really want it, all this. When it got time to sell the company, once the investors realized we had Salesforce, which meant we have this incredibly strong reporting engine, it made things much more appealing for them because they knew that they would be able to have that place where they could see things. And I really do appreciate that. And I think that's one of the things that makes the ecosystem so cool is that you've got people, using Salesforce as a CRM, right?
Yeah.
And like the most archaic sense of the word. And then you've got, organizations using Salesforce in the most incredible ways. And I love seeing the variety of different places that people take it. I always found that so cool. Talked a little bit about, what the trajectory is for the type of clients, you're looking for. But what about for you as a consultant? Do you see yourself building a firm around this? Do you see yourself having, a traditional or non-traditional Salesforce consultancy firm? What do you think? What's the direction you want to take it?
Yeah, good question. So where we're at currently. So we started this thing off literally just me. And now I have, we have a junior consultant, we have another Salesforce consultant, and then I'm working with a few different people like on the contracting side of things. So kind of as needed basis, but we have an architect, we have a developer, and then we, as far as the business goes, have a full-time social media manager. So we're looking at, 5 or 6 people already involved in the business, which has been great to kind of get us running where we're at already. And where I kind of see myself fitting in is having the experiences that I've had with past companies working full-time, where I did work with a consultant. I felt like there was a space there for me specifically in the sense that I've always had a lot of experiences classes leading up to this around communication and trying to get better at that. And I've always kind of been in a people facing kind of role. And so as I've continued to refine that, where I saw a lack of things as I would work with different consultants is typically you'll get a consultant from a reputable place and no fault of their own, but they'll get, lined up with quite a few different clients for their billable hours. So it does get tricky, I'd admit, because if one client's 5 hours and another one's 15, it's like, okay, how am I going to make time for everybody? But the point on the user end, right, is where it doesn't work out as well for the business is you get in this position where it's like, okay, hey, I hired this consultant. And then anytime I need like this one-off meeting that was unforeseen, or I need a Slack message right away, or I just want to pick up the phone and call you real quick, like you're not available because your schedule is so blocked out with all these other clients you're working with from that firm that it makes it really hard for me to actually get context with you. It makes it hard for me to feel like we're in this together. I think most businesses, what they truly want, is they want a consultant, if they do hire one, to feel like a full-time employee. So somebody that's like in their system, somebody that's there on a moment's notice, someone that's flexible like a full-time employee would be, but also providing them all the awesome stuff of like the consulting side, strategy and vision and like technical build. So I've tried to fill that gap. And what I want to do moving forward, what I've been trying to sustain right now is limiting client intake. So I think like a big piece of that, right, is trying to figure out how many people we should, how many billable hours should work with that person. So as I've done that though, and I join their Slack, I join their teams, I make my calendar a little more available so that way I am flexible. I think that makes all the difference because they don't feel like, hey, I hired this guy and I never hear from him. I kind of just like got ghosted, right? And he shows up at this one meeting that I'm available to meet with him. It's like, no, your business changes and you have ad hoc things that come up. And that's what I want to be there for as well. Like I'm helping you with Salesforce. That's why you hired me.
What I was thinking about is like trends, like, people have started reaching out to me about, the trust layer, the new AI stuff coming in. And I've been told it's in the next couple months, we're going to see a lot more of that, being rolled out in Salesforce. What are you seeing as like the things that are going to be talked about this year, like in the Salesforce space? What do you think the big trends are?
Yeah, that's a good one. Man. Yeah, AI for sure. I feel like we saw a lot pop up. 2022 ChatGPT was rolled out, made a big impact right away. And then I think, it kind of took two paths, at least my perspective, what I've seen. It's like one, people really tried to start figuring out all the prompt engineering and actually using it to their advantage. And then the other group of people, would use it for like something kind of silly here or there, random questions, but never really truly got a hold of like how to fully use it. And so kind of chalked it up to like, it's kind of a novelty, kind of cool, but it doesn't really give me the results I want. So what I think is going to be interesting moving forward is like that group that chose to kind of keep hacking through tends to usually happen with technology is like, they're the ones that are building out the companies. They're the ones that are perfecting it. So I know I've seen like AI Force that is supposed to be like its own Salesforce chat GPT, right? And I know some people like are part of that project and trying to see that through in this space. So that one will be interesting. I know Salesforce themselves, they would be crazy not to be looking into that. So I know that they're trying to roll that out as well within Salesforce. So it'll be interesting to see like how that gets played out, what direction they go with that. But I do think that group is really going to push forward on a lot of that stuff. I think we even saw, it would be even interesting to see if all the NFT stuff makes a comeback. I know they made an NFT cloud at one point, and then all like the economy kind of dropped and like NFTs kind of went to nothing. But I think that in general, that technology, same idea, the people that looked into it, I think is really cool. We talked about this early in our combo, but just like working with like health organizations. I've worked with a few now, and a big problem there is always like the safety of who can share what and how do we know it's safe. And so anything you integrate with, as you know, you have to make sure that you're checking all these boxes. And with that space, NFTs, blockchain type stuff, it'd be interesting to see how that comes out in the next couple of years. Because the whole idea behind that is like keeping things verified, keeping things traceable, keeping things more secure. So as you look down that path, I think that's more the direction that a lot of like the pioneers from at least what I research are trying to push in, right? It's like, we're trying to make smart contracts. We're trying to make it to where this is traceable. It's easier to access. You can share data safely. And, when you look at like an example of just like health data. Like a lot of people are putting it in on like just their iPhone, or they'll put it in on Google, or they'll put it somewhere where it's like, it's not like the safest place to put it, but there's not really a ton of alternatives. And I feel like, or there's these one-off apps that you can download. So that one would be interesting too, to see come out. And then I think like lastly, just as like we've gotten more and more into remote work, I just saw this morning, I think from Salesforce Ben, is just the difference in the ecosystem of what people are going to choose to do going forward with careers. I know like remote work is kind of like dying out. It feels like more people, at least here in the States, have been pushing more towards getting back to the office after the pandemic. And you obviously have people like all of us that have gone through it, who got adjusted to that, liked it, made it work for them. And so now you're seeing this like rise of people that want to get into things like I'm doing, independent consulting, or building an agency, or going off on their own in other ways with Salesforce, and, you know, supplying their skill set in that niche. So that one will be interesting. And I think with that, hand in hand comes this personal branding thing that we started off the call with. So the usual path for people to get into that, not the only one, but the usual, is building a brand. One, because you're not paying for ads, you're not paying for a website, it's just social media. So it's just your time that you're sinking in. And as we know, when you look at personal brands in general, they're always a huge differentiator. You have like the classic example of like Elon Musk and Tesla, right? You go look at Tesla, it has way less followers than like Elon Musk himself. Elon Musk, as you know, with like X, used to be Twitter, just really anything he puts out there, he can really get deemed for fluctuating the markets based on what he wants to say. So you see this massive impact at that high scale of what it actually could do. And you also see it with people who used to be kind of like this influencer celebrity kind of person for a skill set, join with a brand, make it very valuable, and then sell. I don't know the exact brand, but like Conor McGregor, I think, got into some kind of like alcohol afterwards, right? And he built that brand up, sold it for billions, I believe. So like, that's a good example. Just this fighter guy has a huge reputation about him and personal brand for how he acts and who he is as a person, and what he's been able to join up with after this skill set of fighting to be able to continue his career that way. So I think that those are kind of my three, is like interesting to see the blockchain, interesting to see AI, and then more interesting to see, as we're pushing back to go back to work and into the office, what the market is going to do within Salesforce and how they're going to push against that to maybe be like, hey, maybe I just go out on my own and figure this thing out. Like I think it's been proven enough at this point where it's not as trendy or like a first timer. Like everybody knows that if you go down that path, like there's too many people that have done it to proven that track record for them. So be interesting to kind of see those three.
And are you active on other platforms? Are you active on X? Are you active on things other than LinkedIn?
I am, but I'm nowhere near the size. I've really kind of leaned on LinkedIn a lot. But yeah, I do have stuff on X, and then I do have stuff over on YouTube as well. So my goal this year is to make a lot more content for YouTube. I think I've found just like a lot more passive that way on your selling points, especially doing an agency where you don't have to be on the phone all the time and you can warm up leads another way. I'm always interested in that. So trying to get into the YouTube stuff this year. But I do have a couple thousand subscribers on either one of those. So I've had some presence over there for the last couple of years.
Nice. Well, this has been a really great conversation. Hopefully the first in this series, and maybe we can have some more in the future, and maybe also do some kind of more technical deep dives and get really into the weeds together a little bit. I guess one piece of advice, if you have any, for people listening to this conversation and wanting to jumpstart their career in the Salesforce ecosystem.
I think if I was speaking to my younger self, it'd just be like consistency, probably. I think a lot of the time people see something like this or listen to something like this, and they're like, hey, it sounds like a path that resonates with me and I want to do it. And then the biggest thing is just realizing like there's a pretty big gap between 0 and step 1. But once you get past that step 1, it gets a lot easier if you just keep up with the consistency. So going back to personal branding, trying to get yourself out there more, marketing yourself, applying for jobs, all that stuff gets easier the more you do it. And also kind of knowing that like it is going to be a grind right from the jump. Like don't buy into, oh, I put myself out there and automatically automatically get the job or automatically build the brand. It's like, no, it is going to be a grind. And I think once you accept that too, it makes that consistency part easier. Last piece is one of these YouTubers that I follow. His biggest thing is like, if you're going to start a YouTube channel, just already have in your mind that the first 50 videos you make are all going to be horrible, and to get through those first 50 as fast as possible, because you're going to learn, you'll be able to grow a lot more through those 50. So it's kind of the same idea, I would say, with this. It's like, just kind of know that there's a grind, get through it, and you'll be able to get like yourself to the other side of where you want to go.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I think, now that it's getting towards the end, thanks a lot for your time. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Salesforce Radio. Don't forget to subscribe for more exciting discussions, expert tips, and exclusive interviews with industry leaders. Stay connected with Titan, plus the power of the planet's leading CRM. See you next time.